The night everything changed began like every other night of my life. Quiet, ordinary, and heavy with the kind of exhaustion only a single father understands. The kind that settles into your bones and never quite leaves, especially when your entire world sleeps. In the next room with a stuffed animal clutched to their chest and a future balanced on your decisions alone. And I remember thinking, as I locked the small apartment door behind me, that fate rarely announces itself loudly, that it usually slips in disguised as routine, wearing the face of responsibility and survival. And that night I had no idea. I was walking straight into a life or death moment that would forever bind my name to a woman the world called untouchable, a female billionaire who owned skyscrapers, headlines, and power, but who, in her most fragile hour, would look at me with terror in her eyes and scream, "Leave me!" as if my presence itself was a danger to her existence. And yet before that moment, before the screaming and the blood and the sirens that would come later, there was a road slick with rain, a black luxury car twisted against a steel barrier, and a decision that arrived without warning, demanding an answer in seconds rather than years. Because when you are a single dad, you don't have the luxury of hero fantasies or reckless courage. You measure every risk against the face of your child. And that night my daughter's smile flashed through my mind like a warning light as I slowed my beat-up pickup on the side of the highway, hazards blinking, heart pounding, because I could have driven past. I could have told myself that someone else would stop, that help was already on the way, that my responsibility was waiting for me at home. But then I saw the smoke curling into the rain-soaked darkness, heard a faint cry that cut through the storm, and something inside me, a stubborn, dangerous sense of humanity, refused to let my foot press the accelerator again. So I parked, stepped out into the cold, and ran toward the wreckage without knowing who was inside or what it would cost me, only knowing that if I didn't act, I would never forgive myself. And as I reached the car, hands shaking, rain plastering my shirt to my skin, I saw her slumped behind the wheel, blood trickling from her forehead, eyes glassy but alive. And even then I didn't recognize her, not as the billionaire whose face dominated business magazines, not as the woman rumored to crush competitors without mercy, but simply as another human being trapped between steel and death, whispering something I couldn't hear at first, until I leaned closer and caught the words that would haunt me forever. "Please, don't let me die." And I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The frame bent inward, alarms blaring like panicked screams, and I shouted over the noise that help was coming, that she would be okay. Lies we tell each other in moments like this, because hope is sometimes the only tool we have. But then headlights appeared in the distance, too fast, too close, and suddenly she grabbed my arm with surprising strength, her eyes clearing just enough to focus. And that's when she screamed, voice raw with fear and command, "Leave me!" And for a split second I froze, because no one had ever ordered me to abandon them like that. And she wasn't saying it out of pride or arrogance. She was saying it because she saw what I didn't yet see, a fuel leak spreading beneath the car, the sharp smell of gasoline mixing with rain, the very real possibility that staying meant dying. And my instincts screamed at me to run, to think of my daughter, to think of the promise I made at my wife's grave that I would always come home, that I would never risk leaving our child alone in the world. And yet there I was, knee-deep in rainwater, staring at a woman the world believed was invincible, now reduced to terror, begging me to save myself instead of her. And in that moment, every excuse lined up neatly in my mind. Every logical reason to walk away, because society praises single dads for responsibility. Not for martyrdom, and yet something deeper, something older than logic, whispered that some choices define who you are forever, that some moments ask you not what you can afford to lose, but who you are willing to be. And before I could overthink it, before fear could fully take control, I wrapped my hands around the twisted doorframe and pulled with everything I had, muscles screaming, lungs burning, rain blinding me. And the door gave way just enough for me to wedge my shoulder inside, and she cried out in pain, then screamed again, "Leave me, please!" because she knew time was running out. But I shouted back that I wasn't going anywhere. Not like this, not tonight. And somehow, inch by inch, with the sound of approaching traffic growing louder and sparks beginning to flicker near the engine, I freed her, dragged her away from the car just as flames erupted behind us, the heat roaring like a living thing, and we collapsed onto the wet asphalt, both gasping, both shaking. And as sirens wailed in the distance, she clutched my sleeve and whispered something I didn't expect, something that stripped away every rumor and headline about her wealth and power. She whispered, "Why didn't you leave?" And I didn't have a heroic answer, no speech prepared, only the truth that lived in my chest. So I told her about my daughter, about the world I wanted her to grow up in, a world where people didn't look away when someone needed help, and she stared at me, like I'd just handed her something money couldn't buy, something priceless and fragile. And before the paramedics arrived, before she lost consciousness, she said my name because I had told it to her and promised she would never forget it. And at the time, I thought it was just shock talking, just gratitude in the face of death. But as I watched the ambulance doors close and the flames die down, I had no idea that this single choice, this one refusal to walk away, had just entangled my quiet, struggling life with one of the most powerful women on the planet, setting the stage for consequences I couldn't imagine, tests that would force me to choose again between safety and sacrifice, and a future where leave me would echo not as a command, but as a challenge to everything I believed about courage, love, and what it truly means to be rich. When I thought back on that night later, after everything had burned down and been rebuilt again in ways I never imagined, I realized the hardest part of the choice wasn't pulling her from the wreck or standing my ground when she screamed at me to leave. It was what came after, the quiet, days where life pretends to return to normal while fate rearranges itself behind the scenes. Because the morning after the accident, I woke up to my daughter's soft breathing and the familiar ache of bills stacked on the kitchen table, the same cracked ceiling, the same worn shoes by the door. And for a moment I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing, if saving a billionaire was just a dramatic story my exhausted mind had invented. But then my phone rang, an unfamiliar number, a calm professional voice asking me to confirm my identity, and suddenly the world I knew began to tilt, because hospitals don't usually call people like me unless something is very wrong or very important. And when I arrived, escorted through private hallways past security that looked at my cheap jacket with suspicion, I finally saw her again, pale, bruised, powerful even in weakness, and this time I recognized her not from magazines, but from the way everyone else reacted to her presence, like gravity itself had shifted, and she looked at me with eyes that no longer begged but searched, as if she were measuring something invisible, and she told me the truth without softness, that the crash wasn't an accident, that someone wanted her dead, that the fuel leak I smelled wasn't chance but sabotage, and suddenly the night I thought was over revealed itself as only the beginning, because saving her life had marked me, and now staying alive meant more than courage. It meant choosing whether I would let fear dictate my future or whether I would protect what mattered even when the cost kept rising. And she offered me something then, something that would have solved every problem I had ever had. Money, security, a life where my daughter would never worry again. But there was a condition hidden beneath the generosity, unspoken but heavy, because accepting meant stepping into her war, becoming a target. And for the first time since the crash, she was the one who looked afraid, not for herself but for me. And she said it again, softer this time, eyes locked on mine. Leave me, not as an order but as a warning. And that's when I understood the real meaning of her words, because the first time she told me to leave, it was about fire and seconds and survival. But now it was about choice, about whether I would walk away while I still could, take the money, disappear, protect my child by distance rather than defiance, and everything inside me screamed that this was the smart option, the responsible option, the one society would praise. But then I imagined explaining to my daughter someday why. I turned away when someone needed me, why I taught her that safety mattered more than doing what was right, and I knew I couldn't live with that lesson. So I refused the money, refused the exit, and told her I would help however I could, not because I was brave, but because I was tired of a world where good people survive by looking away, and that decision pulled me deeper than I expected, into nights of watching shadows, into whispers of betrayal within her own empire, into moments where danger brushed so close I could feel it breathe. And when the final threat came, it didn't arrive with guns or explosions, but with a message delivered through the one vulnerability she couldn't buy protection for, my daughter, because they thought forcing me to choose would break me, that I would finally leave, finally run. And standing there in that moment, heart pounding, hands shaking, knowing that any wrong move could cost the life of the person who meant everything to me, I understood the full weight of what it means to be a parent. Because true courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting while fear begs you to stop. And with her trust and my resolve, we exposed the truth, turned the trap back on those who set it, and ended the threat not with violence, but with evidence and courage. And when it was over, when the danger passed and silence returned, she looked at me not as a savior, not as an employee, not as a man beneath her wealth, but as an equal. And she said something that stayed with me more than any promise or reward. You didn't leave when everyone else would have. And I realized then that life or death choices don't always happen in flames and sirens. Sometimes they happen quietly, in rooms where walking away is easy and staying costs everything. And in the end, she rebuilt her empire stronger. I rebuilt my life with honesty instead of fear, and my daughter grew up watching a man who stayed when it mattered, learning that wealth is not what you own, but what you are willing to risk for others. And if there's one reason I tell this story, it's not to glorify danger or sacrifice, but to remind you that one choice, one refusal to turn away, can change the direction of many lives, including your own. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you question what choice you would make when it truly matters, subscribe to the channel now, because the stories we share here aren't just entertainment. They're reminders of who we can become when we choose courage over comfort.